Hi, everyone. I'm Mike, Army veteran, Chief of Staff at YouTube, and Global Leader of VetNet, Google's Veterans Network. Welcome to the Google VetNet Career Week's fireside chat between Alphabet Google CFO, Ruth Porat, and Chairman of the Board and CEO of Johnson & Johnson, Alex Gorsky. Before we begin, we'd like to highlight an impactful veteran nonprofit that helped make this happen, the Travis Manion Foundation.
Military and first responders answered the call to serve, and they have continued to serve our country ever since. Among them, with my brother, First Lieutenant Travis Manion, a Marine who went to Iraq and ultimately gave his life in service to this country. After the death of my brother in 2007, my family started an organization to honor Travis's legacy of character. Today, the Travis Manion Foundation is about more than one person. It's about honoring the legacy of all America's heroes who have stepped up to serve and sacrifice when our country needed them the most. And we're not just an organization, we're a movement. We're a community of veterans, families of the fallen, and inspired civilians, hundreds of thousands of people across the country, working together and leading with character. At Travis Manion Foundation, veterans lead the way. They're out in the community, assessing local needs and providing local leadership. They're working with youth, giving support, mentorship, and guidance, and they're here for one another, serving each other as they served our nation. Be a part of our inspiring team. Visit travismanion.org and join the mission.
Thank you to the wonderful team at TMF for all that you do. And now, time for the chat. Over to you, Ruth.
Thank you, Mike, and hi to everyone. I'm Ruth Porat, the CFO at Google and Alphabet, and I am so excited to be hosting the keynote fireside chat for the 2021 Google VetNet Career Week. So first, a big welcome to all of the veterans, military spouses, and service members listening in from around the world. Today, I am joined by Alex Gorsky, the Chairman of the Board and CEO of Johnson & Johnson. He's a West Point graduate, an Army veteran, and an outspoken advocate for veterans through such organizations as the Travis Manion Foundation. Before we jump in, Alex, welcome and thank you so much for participating in Google VetNet Career Week.
Absolutely, Ruth. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I really look forward to our conversation today.
As do I, and I look forward to getting you out to the Googleplex as soon as we possibly can. I know it's close to where you first started and you met your wife, so we look forward to having you back out here.
Absolutely.
So before we dive in, very important question for you. You spent a good part of your childhood in Michigan, and I know you do a lot for the Philadelphia community. So when the Lions played the Eagles, who do you root for?
Well, you know how Philly is. If you're not rooting for the Eagles, you're in trouble. So the Eagles are my team now.
Awesome. All right. My youngest child as well, and I'm a Wharton grad, so that was the right answer. Let's dive in. I want to start at the beginning. I've often heard you speak about your Midwestern roots and your middle-class upbringing as a grandson of immigrants and a son of a Korean War veteran. So reflecting on this now, how do you think your childhood informed your way of thinking and your future life of service?
Well, Ruth, thanks a lot. And again, it's just awesome to be here and have this conversation with you today. And I just want to start out by first, thanking Google for putting this program together. When you look at the impact you have and the connections and engagement and the resume reviews, the networking, it's just awesome to see this kind of a company really putting efforts and support and real resources behind such an important mission. And so thank you very much. Two, I want to thank everybody on, all the veterans, all their family members, all those who have served, because were it not for your service, we wouldn't even be able to have this conversation. And I'm so proud to be part of you and hopefully, share some words of wisdom, advice, and counsel along the way, and certainly take your questions. And last but not least, I also want to give a shout out to the Travis Manion Foundation. Travis was a very close family friend. And for the last 12 years, to see that organization grow from an idea that his mom and dad and sister had to be one of the most largest and impactful veteran service organizations in the United States, I'm just incredibly proud. But, Ruth, I guess what I would say is, all of us as leaders are who we are, I think, more often than not because of the families that we grew up in, the teachers that we had along the way, the values that we were taught. And in my case, look, it's a little bit of an American success story where, my grandparents, as you said, were immigrants. They never imagined in their wildest dreams when they came over and opened up corner grocery stores or worked in a meat packing plant that one of their grandchildren would have this kind of an opportunity. To my father, who was a Korean War veteran and served for more than 30 years in the U.S. Army Reserves, and my mother, a school teacher, raising 6 children in a very middle-class family, but making sure they provided the right kind of love and support, but at the same time challenge, and instilled in us really a spirit of there was nothing that we could not do if we put our mind to it. And certainly for me, growing up in the Midwest, whether it was working on a farm in the summer baling hay, or going to a small public high school of less than 200, where the teachers knew your parents, and you didn't get very far without the word being passed around. There was a sense of community, of belonging, and the importance of making sure you treated others the way that you wanted to be treated. That those kind of values I carry with me to this very day in my current role here at J&J.
We're going to spend time diving into that, but you also see it in your mantra at West Point. You attended and graduated the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. And I think we have a nice photo to take you down memory lane here, if we can put that.
Oh boy.
Up.
It's when I was a much, much younger person.
Oh, not a day. Day hasn't passed. So, as you think back on that time, I think it was fascinating even then that your philosophy, why walk when you can run? And I'm just curious if you can take us inside how that philosophy influenced your time at West Point and beyond, and what should we take from that philosophy?
Sure. Well, Ruth, for me, I knew that, believe it or not, that I was going to go to West Point from the time I was in about 6th grade. When I visited a family friend who they had a son who was there, and I remember opening the yearbook and just thinking, this is what I want to do. And that whole duty, honor, country, mind, body, spirit kind of ethos was something that just really attracted me. I loved the idea of an academic and a physical as well as a leadership challenge. And I actually wrote in my journal back in 6th grade that that's what I wanted to do. And when I walked on campus, believe it or not, the very first time I walked on West Point grounds was on our day, the first day when we reported there. And it was bigger than life. Just the institution, the history, being part of the Corps was something that I had always dreamed of. It was challenging in every way. But it exposed me to so many experiences and learnings and opportunities that I just would not have had otherwise. That I think it really helped, make me into the leader and the person that I am today. So I look back very fondly on those. And you're right. I took an attitude of why walk when you can run. I tried to dive into all those different activities as much as I possibly could. And, and it's unlike many others who kind of look back and say, oh, I couldn't wait to graduate. Well, yeah, there were certain aspects. I remember leaving there thinking what an incredible experience I had. And I was very fortunate to have that kind of an opportunity.
So let's pick up there, because one of the goals here is really helping people as they think through their careers. And I think it's so fascinating. You left the Army as a Ranger qualified officer and a leader. And then you chose to join J&J. You began as a sales rep at Janssen Pharmaceuticals and then worked your way up. Quite a change. So how did you do that pivot? What lessons do you think all of those who are joining us here today, as you reflect back on the pivot and the steps, what lessons do you think are most important to take away from that journey?
Well, Ruth, as I'm sure you can probably appreciate, I think it was one of the most difficult decisions that I ever made. I mean, I had gone to the academy. I had a good career in the military and in the Army for 6 years. I was part of a 7th Infantry Light Division, and just met incredible colleagues, and had a chance to train in so many places around the world. And in thinking about leaving that, where you had a very prescribed and, well-considered career path to, the civilian world, as we called it, and the unknown where, you didn't know everybody's rank. They didn't wear it on their sleeve. There weren't such, well identified, or at least known to me, career tracks. And frankly, another concern that I had is when I left the military, there'd be that same sense of a bond, a spirit, camaraderie, esprit de corps. And, would I find that same sense of purpose that I certainly had in the mission of the Army for our country in a job, in a civilian career? And so I gave that a lot of thought. I knew, first of all, that I wanted to go to a place that really shared a value system that was important to me, because that was an important part of who I am, who I was at the time. I also wanted to get into an area that I had an interest in, and that was healthcare. I had thought actually at one time about being a doctor. I'd always, done a lot of reading in that area, so it was just something that was naturally interesting to me. And last but not least, I also got some great counsel from mentors and others who had gone through this similar transition, and family members that said, look, if you get into a growing industry with a well-established growing company that offers a chance to develop you, and that isn't necessarily hiring you just for your first job, but in fact for a career, will likely best position you for long-term development. And I think all three of those things are so important. What I would recommend today, find something, first of all, that aligns with your purpose and who you are. Find a field that you're interested in, where you're curious and you know that is going to continue to grow and expand, and find a company that brings those things together and that's got a demonstrated track record of successfully integrating veterans in and providing career opportunities. And that's certainly been the case for me at Johnson & Johnson.
You remind me so much of lessons that I learned from my father, who was a Holocaust refugee, and as soon as he could, enlisted in the British Army. And so much of what can we do to make the world a better place? And what I love being here is we are very mission driven, as Johnson & Johnson is, and it does inspire you to come together as a team to do something bigger than yourself. And it's so important as a motivator in life.
Absolutely. Well, gosh, I can only imagine the experiences of your father. And look, I think when we do feel we're part of something bigger than ourselves, of a broader purpose, it's not so much like work. You
Right.
feel like you're actually on a mission. So when you're putting in long hours, when you're going through the usual twists and turns that we all do over the lifespan of a career, again, it can be very satisfying and rewarding on the other side, knowing ultimately that, you're really making a difference.
So twists and turns in life. I want to spend a little bit of time on that. The title of this talk is Leadership Through Crisis. And you certainly sharpened that tool as an officer in the Army. And we've all obviously been living through something that is historically unprecedented and extremely painful. And I am firmly of the view that what makes us the best leaders that we can be is going through these tougher times. It develops pattern recognition. You know how to lead in tough times like this. And while I was going through school, the kind of key risk management case study that we all looked to and revered was what J&J went through, in the early days with the Tylenol situation back in the 80s, and how quickly you pivoted, went really what many thought was aggressively over the top to protect consumers, send the right message. And so I'm curious if you could take us through what risk management principles guide you today. What are the lessons learned? What should we each take away as we're thinking about what to do when you find yourself in a risk situation like we've all been living through?
Sure. Well, gosh, there's a lot of lessons. And, Ruth, I had a chance to go to Wharton as well. I remember that case study. And of course, I actually had a chance to know some of the individuals who are still around who experienced it. And it was a great playbook. And I feel so humbled to, be in the same chair as Jim Burke, who led us through that. And look, I think there are certain principles that, while times and dynamics and specifics may change, that if you try to reflect from time to time and take a step back, they can be very important guideposts. And one for me is really reminding people of what we were just talking about, that sense of purpose in what they're doing. I think when people feel, again, part of a purpose, it's a glue in an organization. It also, in a sense, it becomes a default switch of sorts that when things are happening fast or where there's uncertainty, that if you go back to those tenets, so in our case, our credo and a commitment to customers and mothers and fathers who use our products, to employees, to communities, and then ultimately to our shareholders, that if you just follow that basic guideline, you're going to make the right decision. And I think making sure that people understand that while there will always be a crisis du jour, that if you keep that value system top of mind in everything that you do, you will be able to manage your way through even the most difficult situations. I think something else that frankly that I learned in the Army, and it was an adage, and some of the viewers may remember it, it used to be mission first, people always. And for me, that is so true in business. Yes, we have, objectives and goals, and we feel this pressure and that pressure, but we've always got to remember that if our people, if we're not keeping them central into everything that we do, if we're not providing them an environment to be their best, if we don't value their diversity and the differences of opinions that they bring to make ultimately better decisions, if we don't find a way to make 1 + 1 + 1 = 7 instead of just being a big argument, then we can't be the best we are as companies. And that was so true with COVID-19, because if you weren't thinking about your employees and taking care of them, you weren't going to be able to continue to serve all your customers and make a difference. And the last one for me, Ruth, that is really important, and sometimes we as leaders forget this, is the importance of taking care of ourselves. Because, we can sometimes think that we've got that big S on our chest, and that, we've got to be there 24/7, and that, we kind of have this image that, the leader comes in and solves every problem. And look, I'm a firm believer in this, Barrett, that people don't want perfect leaders. They want leaders who really care about them, who are human, who are authentic, and that they feel they can connect with. And if we're not taking care of ourselves and thinking about, okay, how am I going to manage my energy? How am I going to, manage my emotions through this, period of time? How can I rely on other team members? How do I get feedback from the people working around me so I know my blind spots? We'll never be able to achieve our goals. So those are some of the things that I try to keep in mind.
I could not agree with you more. Absolutely. I think one of the areas we've spent a lot of time is right on that second point you made, the wellness of our people. And I appreciate the level of stress that everybody's been through. The military has tackled. This is an unprecedented time, and trying to give people the space to really deal with the fact that this is unprecedented, the economic impact, the health impact, and what can we do to support our people as they're trying to juggle? Kids are at home while I'm working. What else? What have you done at J&J that provides that added wellness support for people? And what would you like leaders on this call, all of us are leaders, to take away for what we can do to help others?
Sure. Well, there's a few things. And look, we set an ambition where we say we don't only want to be the world's largest, most diverse, and arguably best healthcare company. We want to be the healthiest healthcare company, because we know that, look, when we bring our best health, when we bring our best energy to the workplace, we're just going to be more effective.
Absolutely.
You're going to be more resilient. And look, these roles can be grueling, as we all know. They take their toll. So, what are the kind of things we do? Well, first, as with a lot of things, it starts with education and making sure. And we've been really vested in the area of health and wellness and prevention for some time. We know, for example, that 75% of the things that either kill us or that end up making a major difference in our morbidity over time are largely controlled through our behavior. And look, it involves things like, how do you move? And it doesn't mean that you got to run a marathon or a triathlon, but what kind of daily ritual around movement and exercise and getting around can you put into your day that helps you stay healthier? How do we eat? And again, sometimes it's the little things, and it's not about, everybody's got to, have a particular diet, but find what works for you, and make sure you understand the impact that can have on your health. What about sleep and incorporating rest, and so that you find the time to re-energize? And we try to make sure that we provide people those tools, the education. We actually, over 95% of our employees have actually participated in a program to help them understand the relationship between all these different factors. Something else that we found out during COVID-19 in particular is the importance of mental health and balance.
Absolutely.
And that, how do we manage the stress, the anxiety? Because while, yes, bad habits, whether it's, smoking or eating or drinking to excess can be bad for you, stress can also manifest itself in a lot of different ways. So learning how to manage your stress and, what are the triggers for you and what kind of resources can you seek out are really important. And that's something, again, where we've added a lot of emphasis. And last but not least, it's also how do you share these tools with your family? Because we also know that, look, a family is only as healthy as its most unhealthy member. And being able to share that so that there's like a support network, not only at your workplace, but in your family is so critical overall to, I think, maintaining that kind of positive energy.
Yeah, great words of wisdom. I have one more question before we open it up to some questions from the audience, of which there are many. I want to talk a bit about innovation, something you and I have talked about. You've most certainly embraced innovation as a strategic pillar of all that you do at J&J. We've certainly seen it firsthand at Alphabet and love the work that we do with you, all that we're doing with Verily and J&J creating Verb Surgical to build robot-assisted interventions in surgery and beyond. And then all that you've done to establish innovation centers in the world's top life sciences hub, including out here. And you've been really vocal about the importance of embracing the cloud. So how do you encourage and promote innovation within your organization in an industry with significant regulation and where the decisions that you make can be the difference between life and death?
Well, look, we know that to justify our existence, our success, our future, we have got to innovate. Ultimately, we have to bring products and services and support to patients, to healthcare systems, to consumers that help them live a longer, healthier, and happier life, that add value and that are differentiated from what currently exists. And so without innovation, we just don't have that right. And it's amazing at Johnson & Johnson, about every, if you look at our overall portfolio, 25% of our total sales are from products that have been launched over the last 5 years. And so if you think about that for an $85 billion company and you just do the math, that ends up being over $20 billion every 5 years that you've got to be adding. By the way, that doesn't even count what you're replacing if you want to keep a growth rate going. And look, it starts with, number one, great scientists who are really committed to the very best innovation. And again, with our people, making sure that you bring them into, it's about the environment that you create. We also have a firm belief that we'll never, and while we're very proud of our scientists and what we do here, we'll never invent everything. So about 50% of the time, we innovate externally. And if you look over the last 5 years, for example, we've invested about $50 billion in research and development inside of Johnson & Johnson, which puts us among the top 5 companies in the US and the top 10 in the world. But we also invested about an equal amount, about $55 billion, in external innovation. So think licensing, acquisitions, and other kinds of partnerships. And as you noted, we put innovation centers in place that tend to be around the top academic centers in the world, where we help develop ecosystems of venture groups, academic centers, companies, and others where we can partner and really identify that unique new molecule or that, and kind of nascent technology. And we apply clinical development, regulatory development, and that's how we create billion-dollar platforms. And at Johnson & Johnson, we have almost 30 separate billion-dollar platforms across all of our different portfolios. Look, it's also something we recognize and that we reward. We believe every year we have, it's almost like the Academy Awards of Science and the Robert Wood Johnson Award, the Dr. Paul Janssen Award, where we really try to pay homage to our scientists, our researchers, our technical experts that are helping us advance on this cause. And look, and the other thing you have to recognize is not everything's going to be successful.
Right.
And so you've got to create an environment where people can take risk and get rewarded, but also all doing so as part of, look, ultimately helping people, helping patients, helping consumers around the world.
Excellent. Let us turn it over now to some audience questions. If we could pull up the first story question, I think that's going to get pinned so I can actually read it. Coming right up. Okay, first question up. Your successful career is seemingly filled with impressive achievement after achievement. Did you ever suffer from imposter syndrome once you transitioned out of the Army to J&J? Aside, did you walk any hours when you were a cadet at West Point? Go Army. All right.
All right. Great question. So let me start with the second one. Yes, I did. During Beast Barracks, I didn't shut the lock on my lockbox all the way, and the tactical officer pulled on it. And so I ended up spending a few hours on the area, but it taught me I never wanted to waste my time like that again. So yes, I did. But look, I think all of our careers are filled with different learnings and twists and turns, challenges, that we faced. And, and I think when we look back on them, it seems like, oh, it was a great learning experience. When you're actually going through them, it wasn't quite as pleasant at the time. And, for me, every step of the way, I remember transitioning out when I was a captain in the Army. I was a battery commander and, had a lot of responsibility. And I stepped out as a sales representative where I was Willie Loman. And learning how to make that kind of a transition with the right amount of humility, the right amount of an attitude of, hey, I've got to learn. I'm not in command. That was a big change. Learning different leadership skills, and while there were some similarities between leading soldiers, obviously it's different when you're in a corporate environment. And how do you build on the best of those, but adapt it, to a new environment? Just having to learn a new language. One of the reasons I went back to get my MBA at Wharton was because I remember walking into these meetings, and Ruth, as a CFO now, all these people are talking about, ENPVs and IRRs, and I'm thinking, what language are they speaking? I didn't study a lot of finance and marketing and accounting courses in college. I had a Bachelor of Science and spent a lot of time in engineering, courses. And so, going back to school and, picking that up and learning opened up an entirely, new world to me. And, so that was a big learning experience. And look, there were other things along the way where, having to, our family and I had a chance to move to Europe and run one of our divisions there for a while, was a tremendous learning experience, learning how to adapt to different cultures and learn different healthcare systems. So I think one of the most important things you can do as a leader is be comfortable with being uncomfortable from time to time, and learn from your mistakes, and build on them, and continue to get better. One thing I think you never want to do as an executive is peak too early. You want to keep improving, keep getting better all the time.
I think that's great advice. I think also implicit in that, I think humility makes us stronger because it makes us strive to do more. And hubris is a leading indicator for people who fail. And your point about learning and growing and remaining humble and focused on it does actually set new heights. It's a way to redefine what is imposter syndrome.
Oh, I'm sure.
I think is helpful. All right, next question. You quickly transitioned from the Army to healthcare. At what point in your transition journey did you know that healthcare and J&J was the right industry for you? Did you aim to test it out and then figure it out, or was it pre-planned and confirmed through research and preparation?
Oh, I wish I could, account for it all based upon great strategy and insight. But I got to tell you, some of it was serendipitous and good fortune, just being lucky. I would say probably the first, when it really came together for me, is when I made a transition. I was a sales representative, and then I was a sales manager. And then I was fortunate enough to become part of a marketing team. And I remember, so, the first job as a sales representative, it was very customer facing. You really had to learn what healthcare systems were like. You learned a lot about our products, how customers made decisions. Those were certainly important to learn. Being a sales manager was also, I had to learn how to lead different personalities on my team. and adapt my leadership style to really bring out the best in each one of them versus the old style of, okay, I'm in charge, you kind of adapt. No. You found if you want to get the best, you've got to be able to adapt, based upon the different desires and career objectives that people had. But where it really came is when I went into marketing, and I felt like I had a chance to then take some of my leadership skills that I had learned in the military, but then see all these new strategic dimensions from our business about how I had to interact with our finance department, with our product development department, with other different, regulatory, different parts of the organization. And suddenly it was like a light bulb went off of, oh my gosh, there's so many different opportunities that I never even knew existed. And it just opened up a whole new world to me. And I think it was at that point where I really knew, boy, I was so fortunate to, again, join a company in a space that I loved, and be part of a company that frankly provided me the kind of opportunity to get exposed to different career possibilities.
That's fantastic. I keep hearing continuous learning guided you at every step. It's fantastic.
And by the way, every one of those, you felt like the imposter at first. And there's never been a job that I went into where I was 100% comfortable, along the way. But I think when you've got a few butterflies in the stomach, so to speak, I think that helps you actually get to to an even better place.
Great. Next question. For transitioning military members with a year plus before transition, what certificates, education, etc., do you recommend to help bolster an individual's business acumen and resume desirability for individuals striving for business development, strategist, manager roles?
Yep. Yeah, great question. And I'm glad to hear that many people participating today are thinking strategically about, look, how do I transition? And it's not just about when do you make that entree and what you do from there, but how do you prepare yourself to be your best beginning on that day one? And look, there's always going to be a lot of uncertainty, but a few things that I would say is, and by the way, these will help you not only as you get ready, but I would say for the rest of your career. Number one, be a voracious reader. I find that I never go to bed without, that book by my bed, where I probably don't spend at least 20 or 30 minutes trying to soak up as much information as I possibly can, in addition to, that other times I might put in. And by the way, sometimes those are business books where it's maybe I'm learning about a certain domain, but other times it could be a history that just helps you kind of develop mental constructs that can help you make decisions along the way. Two, it's about education. Whenever you can take a course and learn something new, that's something that no one can ever take away from you. And so I always encourage people, boy, I think education always has a payoff in the end. That doesn't mean everybody needs to go get an MBA, but find ways to continue your education, at a really in a consistent and sustainable way. And last but not least, get out and meet people, talk, build networks, develop mentors, get advice, find out what it's really like from as many different sources. And in some cases, that's just going to help you make your decisions. In other cases, it may open a door for you that you didn't even appreciate when you first walked into it. And then suddenly there's 20 more doors that you can walk through just as a basis for that relationship. So those are three things that I would highly recommend, particularly in that year before you're thinking about transitioning out.
That's fantastic. There's an obvious follow-up. Be a voracious reader. What are you reading now, or what do you think we should all be reading?
Oh, boy. Well, I just got done with an incredible book, Codebreaker, by Walter Isaacson. And of course, it's about Jennifer Doudna, who developed the CRISPR-Cas9 technology. And by the way, she's on our board of directors. How often do you have that opportunity? She's a very close friend. But to read the story about science and innovation and about the process of that, in a major academic institution, let alone in that broader ecosystem, the resilience, the grit, the failure, the risk taking along the way. Not only did it really provide a lot of insights into this technology that, by the way, I think can really represent tremendous advancements in healthcare going forward, but also the how, the story behind it. And to do that with someone that I actually know, I kept burning pages every night. I was going to bed a little bit later and a little bit later. My wife and I both really enjoyed that book.
Yeah, perfect answer. She is amazing. Okay, next question. Nolan T asks, what makes a veteran stand out the most? What soft skills are the most sought after to have in your team as a solidified leader?
Look, I think understanding the importance of teamwork and being able to work as part of a group of people, combined with a sense of what I would say, always trying to accomplish a mission. First of all, working with people, I think, there are many skills and many capabilities, some that can be quite technical where, as a single contributor, you can be successful. And I think most people in the military rely on a group or a team and come into the workplace with that kind of a mindset. And I think building on those skills that you've learned and using those and bringing, again, groups of diverse people together. I said one of my biggest lessons in the military was diversity. In so many other environments, you get to pick who you're around and who you're with from high school to college, to your fraternity, to your sorority, to your job. And you almost go through that entire period in a cocoon. And one of the things I love about the military is you don't pick your squad mates. You don't even get to pick your bunk mates at certain times when you're going through training. And just being around people who don't look like you, who have different backgrounds, I think that builds up a great appreciation of humanity that we share. I wish all of us or more of us would have to go through that experience. I think it would be better for our society, better for our country, better for all of us as individuals. And I think, building on those skill sets and that teamwork in the military is really important. Two, it's about the spirit of, hey, we're going to figure out a way to accomplish this mission. And it's, in Ruth, I'm sure you probably had this experience. Sometimes you can find in the business world, people make careers out of admiring problems. And you can sound so eloquent, so intelligent, it's like you're in the stands and, oh, this and this, and, and at the end of the day, you got to go, yeah, but what are you going to do about it? And, what are your solutions that you're actually recommending? And I think in the military, failure is not an option many times. And yes, you need to do your homework. You need to make sure you understand the problem, that you quantify it. But then it's about what can you actually do? And then how do you go about organizing team to execute on that, is really important. And I think that's another characteristic. And last but not least, I think it's about grit. It's about resilience. And there's one thing I learned in the Army, whether it was at Ranger School or my time as soldier at West Point, hey, you got knocked down a lot. You had to pick yourself back up, and you didn't want to. You were tired. You were hungry. It hurt. And, you felt almost overwhelmed. But, it's like Winston Churchill said, you got to keep boogering along. And sometimes in business, that's it. You got to keep moving. And I think all those are things that you can really bring. And frankly, that's what we really value about veterans, coming to work at Johnson & Johnson. But I think those are at least three important areas that they contribute in a big way to business in our country.
Yeah, great answer. Great wisdom. Next question. How do you foster debate and welcome diversity of thoughts internally while simultaneously being decisive and moving quickly?
Yeah, look, that's one of the ongoing trade-offs that you're always making as a leader. And look, I think there's a few things. One is it starts, I believe, in the fundamental concept that you bring about to your teams that you work with. And that is, are you bringing a diverse team to bear that can bring different perspectives? I mean, if you all went to the same school, talk alike, look alike, sound alike, well, what the hell? You don't need everybody there. It's a lot easier to just make a single decision. But what are you going to miss? Well, you're going to miss that skeptic who, yeah, can sometimes make you bite on your back molars because you're thinking, oh, here they go again. But it makes you pause that extra moment to give consideration. Or the other person maybe at the table who's always action-oriented, who you sometimes think, whoa, slow down. Maybe they're going to push you a little bit sometime so that hey, yes, we're going to go through the appropriate process, but we're not going to let process rule the day. We're going to ensure that we have this sense of outcome and urgency. So it's who do you surround yourself with? And then do you create an environment where people feel free and unencumbered, where they're not trying to guess what their boss is thinking so that they respond in a way that the boss likes? And that can, again, start with very simple things where when you're making a decision, early on in your career, what you can find is that you're kind of trained that you want to get your opinion out there so that, you get involved in the hash. Well, I found, Ruth, and I don't know if you had, the longer you go, the minute you put your opinion out there, opinions tend to get formed very quickly in alignment. And it's something as simple as, let's go around the room and I want to hear from each of you what you think. And then, forming your opinion and putting it out. And so I think creating that kind of environment. And last but not least, look, one of the things that I'll try to do if I'm faced with a very big decision, one, I'll always say I want to sleep on it. Because if it's that big, it probably deserves a bit of a pause. And it's not because you're indecisive, but because if you sleep on it and you wake up the next morning feeling the same way, you're in the right place. If you wake up and you still have a doubt, it's probably a good reason. And you should go in and do a little bit more digging. And so those are some of the things that, I've tried to incorporate in my decision making, again, to get that balance between, hey, I want to be decisive. At the same time, I want to make sure that, we're ultimately making the right and best decisions for the entire organization.
I so agree that getting other people's views before you express your own is the best way to ensure you're bringing the best to the surface, in particular with underrepresented groups, making sure you're pulling people in who maybe haven't had as loud a voice in the room at the time. So yeah, great advice as well. Let's go to the next one. Michael J. asks, Alex, you spoke at length about J&J innovation. What do you believe is the role of robotics in the healthcare industry in the coming decades? And what is J&J doing to be involved in that space?
Oh, Michael J., great question. The short answer is I think it's going to be ubiquitous across everything that we do. And look, I think one of the things that we've seen, particularly during this COVID period, is just the absolute acceleration of so many of these new technologies, whether it's robotics, whether it's AI, whether it's data sciences. And by the way, all of these, they're like concentric circles because they overlap with each other. I think they are going to inherently influence healthcare, certainly in all of our domains. Let me give you a couple of examples. There is no way we could have developed a COVID-19 vaccine without some of the new data science and analytic tools that have really been developed just over the last several years. It started with the identification of the COVID-19 genomic sequencing information that was literally done within a matter of days and weeks. And we took that and we were able to incorporate it into our vector platform. It even helped us identify the right clinical trial sites to go to. Because if you go back to 2020, look, we were trying to project infection rates, and we were doing this in the summer when there was a bit of a lull. So without the data science and analytics to say, okay, where is the virus likely to be 3 or 4 months from now, we would not be able to accelerate the recruitment of patients into our trial, hence get our vaccine through the development process. So those are examples. Robotics, look, we just mentioned earlier, we are so proud of the partnership that we had with Verily and Verb in incorporating robotics and again, so many of these other sciences into surgery. And the way that I would best describe it is, how do we take some of the same technology that you have in your car, whether it's the GPS coordinates that you put in before that help guide you to a destination, the sensors that are on your mirrors that tell you, oh, you're texting now, get back in your lane. I'm sure none of you do that, but just in case you do, that happens. That tells you when there's something wrong with your car. You get the pop-up display. We're doing our best to incorporate all of that into surgery. So think of it when a surgeon can not only do a very comprehensive preoperative plan, by the way, that would have been predicated upon thousands of similar surgeries conducted to help him or her choose the best path or the right technique that could potentially guide them intraoperatively. No, think cut here, don't resect there, to afterwards that maintains a comprehensive medical health record of that particular procedure so that it could, leave you not only data to be able to further analyze, but really understand what happened in that particular operation. So we're very excited about the potential. And again, we think that platform is going to be critical for the next several decades. And last but not least, even the way that we're discovering and synthesizing compounds now. I was just in one of our facilities a few weeks ago where we were able to continue to synthesize literally thousands of compounds on a daily and weekly basis because of the robotics that we put in place that could all be managed remotely. So even through this pandemic, we were able to keep on pace with our discovery and development program. So we're very excited about it.
It's exciting for all of us as beneficiaries. Next question. What specific advice do you have for someone with a strong military record of achievement, but no college degree? Is that considered a disadvantage in today's job market?
I think you probably have the best opportunity in today's job market than you may have ever had. And, I think far too often we put labels on people, based on education degrees. And one thing I learned very early on in the military was, you can... don't judge somebody just by the initials behind their name, because there were many people that I served with in the military who frankly just didn't have the opportunity to go to some of the great schools that, like Ruth, that we went to. But don't for a second think that they're not wicked smart. And by the way, we probably both know people in our current roles who have a lot of initials behind their name that like to do those problem admiring and other things that aren't as always productive as we would like them to be. And so I think it's about, understanding what particular skills you really have. I think companies more and more are realizing, in fact, I've been part of an initiative at the Business Roundtable that I know the tech industry has really leaned into. Look, how do we go about different kinds of credentialing? Do you actually need a 4-year degree to do some of the technical skills and capabilities that are needed in today's workforce? The answer is no. And so I think more and more companies are opening up their aperture. And too often, I think it could be argued that the college degree was almost like a filter as part of the process, rather than really clear criteria saying, look, what experiences, what skill sets do you have that could be transferred? And then again, what I would say is, so often in the military, all these other skills, whether it's leadership, perseverance, discipline, things like that, boy, they end up being like rocket fuel once you get that domain expertise and once you get your foot in the door, because those are the life skills that you can't always teach.
Yeah, if I can just add on to that, completely agree, Alex. And for those of you who are in that position, you can go Google, Grow with Google. We do digital skills training. It's a 3 to 6 month program. You can get a certificate and everything from IT support to data analytics to user experience. And we built a consortium of over 130 companies that will accept the certificate. It started as something we were doing for ourselves. And then we said, you know what, this is great. Let's make it a certificate that's transportable. So there are different ways out there in a shortened period of time to get some great skills training. And we're really excited about that.
And Ruth, congrats to you and Google too for doing that, because I think that's also a way of, frankly, opening up so many other job and career opportunities for people maybe who just, again, didn't have access to some of those. And I think that can do a lot for, and frankly, increasing innovation, increasing access for society and for business in America.
And you need no prior experience, I should have said. Let's
Exactly.
take one last question. I think we could go on forever, but sadly,
Sure.
Just one last question. So Jeff Hamill asks, you discussed J&J's approach to innovation, which is impressive for a 135-year-old company. Google is a data-driven organization. How do you think about the power of data and simultaneously the cloud, enabling J&J's future and focus on different initiatives?
Yeah, Jeff, great question. And look, almost all of the kind of innovations I were talking about earlier really are not possible without a cloud technology. To first of all, just develop the capacity to have the flexibility, the kind of access that we need. Whether it's the kind of data analytics, you can imagine the databases that we have to deal with on the pharmaceutical side, whether it's compound libraries or frankly, databases that review side effects, for a medication. Or if you think about how would you ever be able to take 100,000 prostatectomies that you've got a video of to develop, what is the best protocol for a particular approach. That's all really enabled by cloud computing. And or even on our consumer business, how do you develop the kind of personalized approaches to our beauty products, for example, and again, create the kind of database you need without the cloud? It's just about impossible. So again, we see that as really inherent to what we're doing, and we're upgrading and expanding our cloud-based capabilities as we speak. But we look at that as being really foundational to so many of our other innovation and technology advancements.
I think we might be able to squeeze one more in. I started to see it rolling up, and I think it's an important one. If we can go back to the question. I love your advice, be comfortable being uncomfortable. It's very much a Googleism as well. So learn from your mistakes, completely agree. When you assumed the CEO role of J&J, what mistake did you learn most from?
Oh, boy. I think there's a lot of lessons that you go through as the learning curve, as a CEO. And, I think one of the early mistakes that you made is just where do you spend your time? Because you step into the role and you suddenly get sucked into this vortex of this meeting, that meeting, this requirement, that requirement, this external, commitment. And, you've just got to finally learn how do you get control of all that. And look, you never have complete control because, there's always something, like the bumper sticker says, stuff happens, and you've got to be flexible and responsive and agile enough for that. But I think really being discriminating on your calendar and trying to be more thoughtful about where you're going to spend your time and your energy and your efforts, where can you make a difference, I think is one. I think the other one is, where do you feel, and I'll use a military a metaphor or analogy, there are certain times when you have to hover up, and there's certain times when you got to parachute in. And I think early on, you tend to make mistakes and if you're parachuting in all the time, you're micromanaging. On the other hand, if you're constantly hovering up, you might be strategically sound, but completely out of touch with what's really going on in your business. And I think understanding that kind of, variability and you get a sense of that, I think as you go along. So, and look, last but not least, and I alluded to it earlier, is, none of us are Superman or Superwoman. I think you've got to learn to pace yourself. I think if you don't take time once in a while to get a bit of a break as much as you can, if you don't spend time with your family, staying connected and, being real. I mean, I still wash the dishes at night when we're done with dinner, when I'm at home, and I still vacuum. And, I think it keeps you real. I think those are really important things.
You've spoken on so many issues with such passion and depth here today. And very early on in our conversation, you talked about the importance of being part of a purpose-driven organization. With all the issues in society, I know you're called on to speak on so many different things all the time. How do you make a choice as to where it makes sense and where it's just your voice gets diluted? How do you think about stepping into a lot of the societal challenges that we're all dealing with?
Yeah, Ruth, boy, that's a tough one, especially in today's environment. I mean, again, as you know, our jobs are so much different from the people who sat in our chairs before. And I say that in all humility. It's just because I think the expectations about business, about CEOs, CFOs, executives have changed dramatically. And look, and there's not a day that goes by where there's not a mini crisis of sorts that you're dealing with. And, when we tried to apply a framework at Johnson & Johnson, where I think one of the first questions we ask is, does this fundamentally have to do with healthcare and our mission in healthcare? And if it does, obviously we feel that we should have a voice. Now, there's a series of questions that we ask after that are, can we make a difference? Are we willing to put resources behind it? Will we be credible in doing so? But to me, that's the first question is it something in healthcare, again, where we feel we can make a difference? And then I think the second one is this something that is fundamental to our credo values around a commitment to patients and consumers, to your employees, to your community. And I realize that's a bit of a broader net or rubric, but that's another, you might say, screen that we use to say, if it's just in complete, contrast to that, then there too we may need to lean in, and that's what we try to do. And look, I'm sure we don't always get it right. You got to constantly be listening to your stakeholders, to your employees, to others on the outside. It's sometimes difficult when you make a decision not to, because you'll be criticized, and in companies like ours, you're always going to be in the spotlight. But I think over the long term, if you do it in that kind of thoughtful way, if you communicate with your employees and other stakeholders, that you can be successful, and that's the approach that we try to take.
Thank you so much for all of those comments. You started with values and wisdom and ended there as well, and a whole journey in between. Sadly, we are out of time at this point. I'm getting the hook, but I just wanted to thank you for your time, for sharing your stories, for your words of wisdom, and for all that you do to make lives better and save lives for so many of us. To the viewers, this concludes our Fireside Chat with Alex Gorsky, but please do stay tuned into the live stream for an amazing upcoming panel called The Keys of Successful Entrepreneurship, where a director from Google's internal incubator, Area 120, will chat with 4 successful entrepreneurs and startup owners about their journeys, their success and failures, and advice to any business owners. Thank you again, Alex, for speaking to us. Thanks to everyone else for joining us, and enjoy the rest of the Google VetNet Career Week. Thank you so much.
Thanks all.